The Tour de France 2023 has come to an end with Jonas Vingegaard as its overall winner. So today I'll be rating the performance of every single team over the last 3 weeks at the Tour. I'll be doing so from S tier at the top all the way down to DNS, teams that rode so shamefully they might as well have not started. Anyway, let's kick it off with Alpecin-Deceuninck. Let's be honest, this one is pretty simple. Alpecin dominated the sprints, Jasper Philipsen won 4 stages, and the points classification with utter ease. Mathieu van der Poel didn't have his individual successes, but definitely was a major factor in the lead out of Philipsen. I must mention that they weren't the most well-behaved riders on the road, reckless sprinting, also behavior towards riders trying to be in the breakaway and so forth with Pascal Enkron, for example, but that doesn't influence the performance score. So they just had a very good Tour de France, and I'd argue an S-tier Tour de France. So yeah, Alpecin starts at the top of the leaderboard. Next up, Groupama-FDJ. They started the Tour de France with a rather controversial non-selection of Arnaud Démare, especially in the Tour de France with so many opportunities for the sprinters. Their main focus was their unrealistic aim for the podium with David Gaudu, stage win opportunities for the likes of Thibaut Pinot, Madouas and also Kung. I think it's fair to say they failed in every single part of that plan. P6 to 10 was what I expected from Gaudu. He finished P9, so realistically, that's somewhere where he belongs. And next to that, they were basically competitive in a single stage, stage 20 with Pinot in the breakaway. All the rest not competitive for the stage. I will say, as a fan of the sport, seeing Thibaut Pinot ride through the audience on Petit Ballon with all his fans by the side of the road, that is a moment I will remember. In the end, Groupama-FDJ is a victim of their own unrealistic ambitions, and they belong to be in category D. If only they had a sprinter that could rack up some top 5s. Oh wait, they do. On to Intermarché, a team built around multiple goals actually. A top 10 with Meintjes, we had Biniam for the sprints and the versatile sprints, loads of riders like Zimmermann to go in the breakaway for stage wins, but they actually failed across the board, partially due to bad luck. Louis Meintjes, for example, crashed out of a potentially top 10 position. Meanwhile, Biniam has a positioning issue in sprints, but also got hindered a few sprints. Probably does not have the top speed to compete with the top dogs though. I am, however, somewhat disappointed in the versatility of Biniam. I feel like in the past I was expecting him to get over hills easier. One of the best achievements of the team somewhat happened in the background of the race, as in Jörg Zimmermann on Côte la Loze, 6th from the GC group. That is a wonderful performance. Personally, I put them in category C because I expected more in breakaways. Now it's Cofidis time. One of the major breakthroughs of this Tour de France was their rock star, Victor Lafay. He won stage 2, one of the Basque Country opening stages, with a perfectly timed attack in the last kilometer, finishing ahead of Wout van Aert. Sure, he was washed for the rest of the race and crashed out eventually, but that performance, ending the drought of victories of Cofidis that has lasted for so long, that simply already makes their tour. But it didn't stop there. Another breakaway victory from Jon Izagirre, and last minute in stage 20, Guillaume Martin benefits from the crash of Sepp Kuss and finishes in the top 10 of GC. Overall, that is a serious overperformance. That is an A-tier performance. Next up is Movistar. They had bad luck on day 1 with Enric Mas crashing out, so that's their GC leader gone, but they had a team strong enough to be competitive in breakaways later on. For example, they tried with Guerrero, who tried murdering Johannesson at a KOM sprint, so that I didn't like. But we had Jorgensen going in a breakaway in multiple other stages, getting 4th on Puy de Dôme after a wonderful solo, just not making it until the finish. He also got a podium on a different stage. But overall, not the most memorable performance of Movistar at this Tour de France, so category C performance for them. Now, Bahrain Victorious lived up to their name. They got 3-stage victories with Wout Poels, with the likes of Pello Bilbao and Matej Mohoric. That interview was amazing. But they started this Tour de France with Mikel Landa as GC leader, and it was typical Mikel Landa. Landa goes for GC. If he drops out of GC, he doesn't even help the team at all. When Bilbao was the new GC leader, I did not see Landa helping him at all. He tried to go in breakaways again, failed doing so, and eventually Bilbao himself was the hero of the day in GC because he finished 6th in GC, which is a hell of a performance, and Bilbao plus a stage wins, that gives them an A-tier performance. Another team that will be happy after this Tour de France is AG2R. Felix Gall is one of the major breakthroughs of this Tour de France. We saw him being strong at Tour de Suisse and at other races in the season, but this was a major breakthrough, winning on Côte la Loze and finishing in the top 10 of GC and showing that he might as well be one of the best pure climbers in the world. He wasn't their pre-planned leader, that was O'Connor, but he fell out of GC very quickly, But unlike Landa, he folded into a domestique role for Gal and performed that very nicely. And most importantly, they beat Groupama-FDJ in the general classification. That is an A-tier performance for me. UNOX is a difficult one for me, one of the wildcard teams on this Tour de France. When it comes to pure sprints, Christoph and Wadenskjold just don't have the pure sprints to compete. They had some bad luck with Torsten Tran fracturing his elbow relatively early, but Tobias Halland-Johannessen proved that he is definitely on the brink of breakout. Third on the Tourmalet stage behind the likes of Pogacar and Vingegaard, while getting 2 other top 10s from the breakaway, but most importantly 7 from the GC group on the last mountain stage. That's in front of Rodriguez and Hindley. That's crazy. I think B is a good score for UNOX, somewhat what I expected. Now one of the big hitters. Let's talk about Ineos. They started the Tour de France with top 10 candidates: Rodriguez, Bernal, Martinez. Their Dauphiné was pretty bad, so I wasn't necessarily expecting them to fight for the podium. In the end, they had 2 stage wins with Kwiatkowski and Carlos Rodriguez, the last of which really stepped up when it comes to GC, in the contention for the podium for quite a while, but in the end, somewhat dropped partially due to a crash in stage 20 and finished 5th. Now, Pidcock is a very popular rider, but he's also one of the most paid riders in the world, and when it comes to GC, he once again fell through halfway the race. He also wasn't competitive for any stages, so while he once again showed potential for the future in GC, he kind of disappointed. When it comes to Bernal, no expectations. I'm just happy he can ride his bike at this level after his accident. So Ineos overperformed with some of their riders, but they are the highest budget team in the world by a long shot, so sorry Ineos, but I expect more. B tier for you. Let's start with Jayco AlUla. Simon Yates is the big hitter at this team when it comes to the GC, and he performed. 4th in GC, that's a good result for them. In support, Chris Harper and Lawson Craddock rode a great race. But Groenewegen was quite disappointing in the sprints, also when he had the position, so they did not win a stage. Winning a stage would have put them in category A for me, so category B it is. Let's talk about a team that I completely forgot was in this race. Arkéa. Argyll was pretty okay, he was in breakaways, but completely uncompetitive. In the sprints they had Mozzato, which is a pro-Conti sprinter I would say, so top 10s was the max he could get, and he did score a few of those. But I'll be honest, I don't remember much of Arkéa this race, and they might as well have not started, so all the way down in category DNS. Sorry, but this is not a World Tour team. Anyway, we are about halfway the tier list. This is what it looks like at the moment. Alpecin on top, at the bottom, Arkéa, and plenty of teams in between. To start off in similar fashion, let's talk about DSM. Let's talk about roundabouts. Sometimes one side of a roundabout is shorter than another side. The sports director of DSM does not know that. As a consequence, Sam Welsford was not positioned well for the majority of the sprints. When it comes to GC, Bardet kind of fell through really early and he eventually crashed out on stage 14. One light point is that Dinham and Vermaake actually rode a pretty solid race in support. But in the end, DSM only had 3 top 10s and they had the least UCI points of any team at this race. That's a shit performance. That's a bottom of the ranking performance together with Arkéa in DNS. Israel's team was built around stage wins from the breakaway. That was seen directly when you looked at the selection and they delivered. Michael Woods got a stage win. Nylands was pretty strong, but didn't necessarily get the results he was deserving of. It was really that one stage win with Woods that did it. I'd say with the team they had, that's a category B performance. Now where shall we put Lotto Dstny? Ewan podiumed 2 sprints, but then had a messy breakup with the management. Meanwhile, Von Gils had rough crashes early on, but still podiumed the stage. Inkhorn did the same. Campenaerts was in the break all the time in week 3. I would say he deserved the super competitivity that he won. I'd put the team in category B as a consequence, but also because they switched so swiftly to breakaways after Ewan's departure. When you think of EF, you think about Magnus scored breakaways, Carapaz potential GC likely breakaway stage instead, but they didn't really get that. Carapaz crashed out on stage 1, similar to Mas, so not a great start for EF, but they can switch to breakaways after that. They did with Paulus KOM jersey at the start, but not necessarily competitive for stages, just like all the rest of the team. Bettiol, Kort, never competitive for a stage. That's honestly quite disappointing and I'd put them in category D as a consequence. Astana also had their leader crash out. Mark Cavendish, their sprinter, was actually quite competitive in some sprints, 5th, 6th and eventually also 2nd. Now, he did crash out, but they switched to Case Ball in the sprints, which kind of also worked, 5th and 6th for him, so that switch was pretty good. But in the breakaways, not competitive with the likes of Lutsenko. Apparently Moscon was in this race. I didn't see him. Nobody saw him. Anyway, Moscon deserves his own spot on the leaderboard all the way down in DNS, but Astana does not. They're fine with a C, I think. That's a good category for them. On to another successful team. We've got Lidl-Trek right there. Skjelmose was meant to ride GC, but kind of fell through in week 1, but Ciccone went for KOM and he did that pretty well, because he won it. Skjelmose and Pedersen won a stage, but then they both switched into a domestique role. Thanks to close positions in the stages, Pedersen also got second in the points classification, so in the end, Lidl-Trek gets an A classification. That's where they belong. Quick-Step started this Tour de France with sprinter Jacobsen and puncher Alaphilippe. I won't lie, I was not very bullish on that selection, even though you would expect Quick-Step to get roughly 2 stage wins in this Tour de France. And they did not. They got 1 with Asgreen last minute, nearly got a 2nd, but from Quick-Step you expect more. So category C it is for Quick-Step, I'm afraid. On to TotalEnergies, a team that when I was preparing this video, I kind of forgot what they did, but they actually had some solid results. 3 podiums with Burgodeau and Latour, 2 from Burgodeau, 1 from Latour. In the sprint, Sagan was not competitive, but let's be honest about it, he was never going to be. 3 other top 10s, and Steph Cross was also really good in the first part of the Tour de France. He was in the top 15 in GC, but eventually crashed out. So category C for this team, not great, not terrible. So we have 3 teams left, Bora, UAE and Jumbo, and this is what our leaderboards look like. Needless to say, Bora had a pretty good start to the Tour de France, a stage win in a magnificent coup stage from the team on Muddy Blanc, and he also took the yellow jersey. He ended up crashing a bit later, hurting his hip, and eventually dropping in GC towards position 7, but still a solid performance. What I didn't expect was what happened on stage 21. Jordi Meeus winning on the Champs-Élysées. That is spectacular, and that makes this team an A-tier performance. What a performance by the young Belgian, and from Hindley as well. Now we have the clash of the titans between UAE Team Emirates and Jumbo-Visma. Let's start off with the runner-up, UAE. Pogacar in 2nd in GC, didn't win the Tour de France. 3rd, Adam Yates. 2 riders on the podium for this team. They also won 3 stages, 2 with Pogacar, 1 with Adam Yates. Overall in this Tour de France, they didn't have any major fuck-ups. They tried to benefit from the strengths of Pogacar, which on the majority of times that they tried, they did. But unfortunately, that leads to gaining seconds on Vingegaard, and they needed minutes to win. The rouleurs in their team are a clear weakness. They need to sign the likes of a Nils Pollitt or something, because they need someone to control the breakaway formation phase. There's always big breakaways going ahead, and UAE then chases the entire day, and most of the time doesn't catch them. But despite not winning the Tour de France, I would still rate this performance by UAE an S-tier performance, because 2 riders on the podium, that's the best possible consolation prize. On the other side of the ring, Jumbo-Visma. Last year they dominated the Tour de France. Yellow jersey, green jersey, polka dot jersey, and what was it, 6 stages? This year they did not win 6 stages. 1 only, the time trial with Jonas Vingegaard. Notably, Wout van Aert did not win a stage, but I wouldn't crucify Jumbo-Visma for focusing on GC instead of stage wins with Wout van Aert. Because, well, they won the Tour de France. Tactically, no major fuck-ups, some wobbles by Vingegaard here and there, but far from enough to lose the Tour de France. So simply said, Jumbo-Visma, also an S-tier performance, together with UAE Team Emirates and Alpecin. Those are the 3 best teams of this Tour de France. 2 of those teams are some of the highest budget teams in the sport, but Alpecin is not the highest budget team, but they've got the all-out focus on the sprints that was kind of Quick-Step's game a few years ago. Anyway, this tier list was my opinion on this Tour de France. I could be wrong. You can give your opinion below, because I'd love to hear your take on this. What are your winners and losers of this Tour de France? Which teams were complete dog shit? Which teams did great? Make sure to comment it below. As always, thank you very much for watching. Should I do this again for the Vuelta? Tell me, and I will. Goodbye.